Stepmom's controlling demands for spending and relationship details, met by my constant 24/7, 5-minute updates, resulted in her nervous breakdown. My stepmom had a nervous breakdown. And honestly, I was the one who pushed her there. It was a fight for my own life, my independence, and my sanity, and I had to go to extreme lengths to win it. I was 24, living my own life, when my dad married Laura 4 years ago. I figured she'd barely be a blip on my radar. At the wedding, she seemed perfectly normal, respecting my adult status, saying I didn't need another parent. She even made Christmas dinners better, and I was genuinely happy for my dad. For about 5 months, she was great. We'd grab lunch, she'd ask about my accounting job, and she never ever overstepped. I've always considered myself lucky with step-parents, but that was before Jax. The moment I started dating Jax, everything flipped. Laura did a complete 180. Suddenly, Jax's job with the fire department wasn't solid enough. The distance between our apartments was too far. My work hours were excessive for a healthy relationship. Twice a week, she'd call me, lecturing me on relationship psychology and career planning. She even emailed me 20 links about how pets financially ruin young people. My dad just shrugged when I mentioned wanting a cat. But the real insanity started when Jax and I decided to move in together. Laura completely lost it. She called an emergency family meeting, and then she presented a full-blown PowerPoint. Slides detailed the statistics of cohabitation failure rates. She had graphs of my spending habits, which she'd clearly extracted from my dad. She even laid out a timeline for my life by age 30, and living with a boyfriend was nowhere on it. I politely thanked her, said Jax and I were happy, and left. She immediately told my dad I was reckless and needed an intervention. That's when the daily check-ins began. Every morning at 8 a.m., a text, "What are you doing today?" If I didn't reply within an hour, she'd call my dad, frantic with concern. She started making surprise visits to my apartment, inspecting my cleanliness, complaining about my groceries, my laundry schedule. Jax quickly nicknamed her the warden. She tried to strong-arm me into a job at her friend's company, a blatant attempt to monitor me more closely. When I refused, she called my employer to discuss my career path. My boss had to address my personal problems because things were getting so weird. The final straw came during a pregnancy scare. I made the mistake of telling my dad about a delayed period, how anxious Jax and I were. Within hours, Laura appeared at my door with pregnancy tests, prenatal vitamins, and a family planning booklet. When I tried to reassure her it was stress, she actually said I needed to be more responsible and perhaps she should manage my birth control. That was it. I was done. She was a project I needed to manage. But I couldn't just cut her off. My dad was still in the picture, and I knew it would cause a huge rift. So, I decided on a different approach, malicious compliance. Laura wanted check-ins. She got them. Every single detail of my day, texted in real time. 6:47 a.m., woke up. Cleaned teeth for 2 minutes. Used Jax's toothpaste, mine is out. Showered 16 minutes, lavender shampoo. Prepared coffee, 2 sugars. By the 3rd day, she was begging me to stop. I told her, "But Laura, I thought you wanted to be involved in my daily planning." She wanted to control my finances? Absolutely. Every receipt she got. $2 for gum, $1.75 for parking, $3.25 for coffee. I'd ask for feedback. Should I buy name brand tissues or generic? Is $40 too much for a work shirt? I called her 7 times from the grocery store. After the 4th call, she stopped answering when I asked which yogurt had the most probiotics. Then she suggested her friend's job offer again. I threw myself into it. I arranged the interview, then called Laura every hour. What should I wear? How should I do my hair? Should I mention my college internship? I emailed her photos of 13 different dress combinations. During the actual interview, I took a break to call Laura and ask about my salary expectations. Her friend later told her I seemed unstable. The ultimate moment, though, was when she recommended a relationship counselor she knew, Jax, and I booked it immediately. Then we insisted Laura had to be there. She knows our relationship better than anyone, we'd say. During the sessions, we'd call her to ask for her thoughts on the topics being discussed. The counselor, bless her heart, told us it was unhealthy to have a third person involved. She even reached out to Laura privately, telling her she was developing problems related to codependency. The breaking point arrived on my birthday. Laura planned a surprise dinner. I walked into the restaurant expecting my dad and Jax, ready for a nice meal. Instead, I found a conference room, fully prepped, projection screen, printed handouts at every seat, and a woman in a suit standing next to Laura. Her forced, professional smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Laura, buzzing with excessive enthusiasm, waved me over. "Michelle Medina," she announced, "a life coach I hired to help you reach your full potential." Glossy folders with my name on them sat on the table, filled with financial spreadsheets, relationship milestones, career timelines. Jax squeezed my hand under the table. Dad said nothing, but his discomfort was palpable. I realized this was Laura's most audacious move yet, turning my birthday into a life intervention. 3 of our couple friends were there, looking utterly bewildered. Michelle started her lecture on goal setting and life optimization. She asked for my 4-year plan. Right then, I decided to go all in. I gave a comprehensive description of my morning routine, from 6:40 a.m. to 6:50 a.m., depending on snooze button presses. I detailed my full skincare regimen, the precise sequence of getting dressed, how I organized my breakfast prep. Michelle looked a little confused, but kept writing. I moved on to my relationship with Jax, how we divided household chores, our system for choosing what to watch on TV. I explained our grocery shopping approach and how we resolved conflicts over thermostat settings. Laura's smile began to look truly strained. I then described my accounting projects, my file system, my spreadsheet organization, the exact sequence of my lunch break, and how I prioritized afternoon tasks. Michelle abruptly stopped writing and just stared at me. I kept going, describing my evening routine, my weekend plans, my opinions on various home decor items. Jax was struggling not to laugh. Every question Michelle asked, I answered with far more detail than anyone could possibly want. Job aspirations, 9 minutes on certification programs I'd researched. Relationship timeline, a detailed explanation of our date night organization method. Laura tried repeatedly to change the subject, but I just kept talking. After 18 minutes, Michelle stood up, led Laura away towards the kitchen entrance, and I overheard her say, "This appears to be more of a family control situation than a coaching one. She seems to have her life very much together. I'm not sure why I'm here." Laura began speaking in a rapid, hushed tone, her face a bright shade of red. Finally, my dad spoke up, asking Laura why she thought this was appropriate. Our friends, clearly wanting out, practically bolted, one claiming a babysitter emergency. An uncomfortable silence descended over the table. Michelle packed up her things and left before dinner was even served. Laura stood with her arms crossed while my dad paid the bill. Jax and I left without touching our entrees. 2 days later, my dad called. He sounded exhausted. He'd been reflecting on the birthday catastrophe, he said, and realized he'd been avoiding the real issue because dealing with Laura wore him out. Seeing her hire a life coach for my birthday finally showed him how bad things had gotten. He pledged to stand by me if I wanted to set boundaries. I asked if he was serious. He said yes, sincerely, but also sounded apprehensive about his marriage. I thanked him, saying I needed time to figure out what boundaries would even look like. He told me to take my time and call him when I was ready. The very next afternoon, Laura arrived at my apartment with a gigantic gift basket, gourmet chocolates, bath items, and a long handwritten letter. She'd clearly rehearsed a speech about respecting my autonomy, acknowledging me as an adult. Her words were right, but her delivery was off. Before I could even respond, she suggested periodic check-ins to prevent her from worrying. She was already opening her phone calendar. This wasn't an apology. It was damage control, an attempt to retreat while still maintaining control through prearranged interaction. She looked wounded, but acquiesced when I told her I needed space to think. She left the basket and walked back to her car. That evening, Jax found a manila folder in her mailbox when he got home from the fire station. He looked confused bringing it inside. On the front, in Laura's handwriting, was my name. Inside were screenshots of my social media posts from the last 5 months. My work schedule, which I had never given her. Notes about my daily patterns, what time I normally came home, which grocery store I used, when Jax worked night shifts. It was like I was a project under constant surveillance. Going through the pages made me feel sick. She'd been building a case to prove that her advice was valid. Jax was furious. He said we'd gone too far and we had to fix it. I agreed, but what would actually work? Jax suggested we write everything down. A list of clear boundaries, consequences for crossing them, and deliver it to Laura and Dad simultaneously. That night, we sat at our kitchen table, drafting the document. We established contact frequency, once a week, emergency only. Prohibited topics, my career, relationship decisions, daily schedule. No unannounced visits. She had to call first. Absolutely no contact with my employer. We made it clear that violations would result in limited interaction for a set period. Jax helped me make it clear and direct without being rude. We emailed it to Dad to read before our meeting. 2 days later, I sat at a coffee shop downtown with 2 printed copies of our boundary document. Jax was beside me, Dad opposite. Laura showed up 9 minutes late, already defensive. I handed her the paper, explaining that these boundaries were necessary going forward. Her face contorted as she read. Confusion, then anger, then a forced attempt at reasonableness. Some of these seem excessively severe, she murmured. My dad, to my surprise, said, I think they seem fair. She shot him a look that could curdle milk. Jax calmly gave specific examples illustrating the need for each boundary. Laura gave a tight nod, her jaw clenched, and mumbled, I'll give it a shot. Dad reiterated his support and promised to help enforce them. We finished our coffee in awkward silence. 2 days after that boundary meeting, my phone rang at 6:30 a.m. Laura, a text asking if I'd given any more thought to her friend's job offer. I just stared at my phone in disbelief. We just discussed boundaries and career advice was explicitly on the prohibited list. I screenshot the text, sent it to Dad with a message reminding him this was exactly what we talked about. An hour later, he replied, saying he'd spoken to her. His frustration was palpable. I informed my dad I was reducing contact with Laura for 1 week, as per our agreed-upon consequence. His tone was deflated. Is this really necessary? He asked. I reminded him we'd set clear consequences for a reason. After a beat of silence, he said he understood, but his voice was strained. Even though I knew I was doing the right thing, I felt terrible. Laura had broken the rules less than 48 hours after we all agreed to them. I felt relief at enforcing the boundary, but guilt for causing Dad distress. Jax reassured me I'd done everything right and the guilt would pass. Around midday the next day, Dad called. I almost didn't answer. His voice, even before hello, was thick with tension. He sounded weary. Laura, he said, was incredibly upset about the 1-week contact break, and it was causing problems at home. She was constantly asking him to intervene, to persuade me to just call her so they could make amends. I felt that familiar pressure building in my chest. I wanted to give in, to make things easier for Dad, but years of doing that had never worked. I explained to him that upholding my boundaries meant agreeing to a brief discomfort. I reminded him that we had all agreed to these consequences, and if he withdrew his support now, it would just tell Laura she could ignore the rules. He didn't say a word for a moment. Then he agreed, saying he would support the boundaries. but I could hear the immense effort it took him to say it. The weariness in his voice made me feel shame, even though I was doing what was right. After I hung up, I sat, staring at my phone, feeling like the worst daughter on the planet. 3 days later, my cousin Megan messaged me. Laura had been calling various extended family members all week, telling everyone she was concerned about my mental health and asking them to have a reasonable discussion with me. The family grapevine was buzzing. An hour later, my dad's aunt called me, then my uncle, then a second cousin I barely spoke to. Each conversation followed the same script. They knew I was going through a challenging time, they were concerned about my well-being, and they thought I might have been overly harsh with Laura, who only meant to help. I tried to explain the boundary situation, but I could tell their minds were already made up based on whatever Laura had told them. By the third call, I felt completely alone, everyone treating me like I was the problem. Laura had successfully painted herself as the worried stepmother, and me as the troubled stepdaughter in need of help. I was so furious, I wanted to throw my phone across the room. That evening, my Aunt Charlotte called. I was so tired of defending myself, I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Charlotte's call was different. She didn't start with concerns or recommendations. She simply asked, "Is Laura trying to take over your life?" I said yes, bracing myself for another reprimand. Instead, Charlotte told me that Laura had done exactly the same thing to her 10 years ago when I hadn't known the extended family well. Laura had tried to control every aspect of her life, how she raised her children, her career choices, her friends. Charlotte said she'd had to go no contact for a full year before Laura finally backed off. Something inside me shifted. I wasn't crazy. My reaction wasn't an overreaction. Someone else had gone through this and survived. Charlotte continued, Laura has always needed to manage the people around her. It comes from a deep insecurity, which intensified after her first marriage ended disastrously. Her husband left her unexpectedly for another woman. After that, Laura tried to maintain control over everything within her reach. Charlotte said, "Honestly, you're not that important in this. Laura would have done this to anyone who came into Dad's life and allowed her access." Understanding the psychology behind Laura's behavior didn't excuse her actions, but it helped me realize this wasn't personal. I wasn't being targeted because I was doing anything wrong. Laura would have done this regardless of my choices. It was her, not me, who was the source of the problem. After talking for an hour, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't realized I was carrying. Thanksgiving was 3 weeks away. I had to decide if I'd go. Laura would certainly be there. The whole extended family would be watching. Jax and I discussed it over dinner. He said we should go, but with a plan. We agreed we'd leave promptly and without a scene if Laura breached any boundaries. The next day, I called Dad and told him our terms. We would attend Thanksgiving, but he had to tell Laura beforehand that the boundaries remained. No comments on my choices, no romantic life suggestions, no job advice. If she couldn't manage that, we wouldn't stay. He promised he'd talk to her. He wanted us there, he said, and would ensure Laura understood the rules. Thanksgiving morning, my stomach was in knots. Jax made me breakfast, but I could barely eat. We got dressed and drove to Laura and Dad's house. The whole drive, I rehearsed what I'd say if she started. Looking out the window, I saw cars already filling the driveway. My hands were shaking as I rang the doorbell. Dad answered, giving me a big, tight hug. "Everything will be all right," he whispered. Inside, I saw Laura in the kitchen, plating food. She looked up, giving me an excessively bright smile. She greeted us with formal, polite words that sounded nothing like her usual voice. Jax never left my side. We helped set the table, made small talk. Everyone was watching Laura's performance. She asked me kind, fitting questions about my job. She complimented the food I'd brought. She was clearly demonstrating to the family that she was being appropriate and respectful. I responded naturally, not getting swept up in whatever drama she was trying to create. Dinner itself was remarkably ordinary. People ate, talked, laughed. Laura maintained her polite demeanor the entire evening. After dinner, coffee and dessert were served in the living room. Laura approached me in the hallway and asked to speak in a more secluded area. My body stiffened, but I agreed. We went into Dad's office and closed the door. For a few moments, Laura stood by the window, not looking at me. Then she turned. She said she knew she'd gone too far. She admitted she'd scared me off and understood why I'd set boundaries. Her apology wasn't perfect. She included some excuses about just trying to help, but I could see she was genuinely trying to understand what went wrong. She made it clear she didn't want to jeopardize our relationship. I told her the boundaries would remain, but I appreciated her willingness to see the issue. We didn't hug or have a tearful moment, but a shift had occurred. Before Jax and I left, Dad pulled me aside by the front door, the sounds of goodbyes in the background. He told me he'd been setting his own boundaries with Laura about her need to control everything. He'd been seeing a therapist for a few weeks, which was helping him be more vocal. He apologized for taking so long to support me, saying he'd realized, watching this whole thing unfold, that he'd been enabling Laura for years. I hugged him, telling him I was proud. We left with a guarded optimism that things could actually start to improve. 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, I received a text from Laura. She asked if we could meet for coffee. I took my time, carefully considering my reply. We agreed to meet Saturday morning at a coffee shop neither of us felt strongly about. I got there first, choosing a corner table. Laura arrived 4 minutes late. She ordered a drink and sat opposite me. The first few minutes were awkward. We talked about the weather, the coffee. Then, I started talking about a work project. Unlike her typical behavior, Laura listened. She didn't interject with recommendations or advice. She just nodded, then asked a few follow-up questions. It was strange. She seemed open to suggestions. Around the 18-minute mark, she started to say something, then abruptly stopped herself mid-sentence. She apologized, saying she was still acquiring knowledge. She caught herself a second time and backed off before we finished our coffee. It was uncomfortable and awkward, but it felt like real progress. Over the next few weeks, Jax and I implemented a new schedule with my family. We agreed to monthly dinners at neutral locations like restaurants. We set clear time limits to ensure visits didn't drag on. We chose places that allowed a quick exit if we felt uncomfortable. Laura still, from time to time, sent unsolicited advice texts, articles about relationship advice or career planning. But as soon as I reminded her of the boundaries, she would apologize and stop. And when I enforced the rules, my dad started supporting me. He'd send Laura a discreet text, reminding her to observe the established boundaries. It wasn't perfect. Laura still struggled with her compulsion to manage situations, but she was trying, and Dad was finally on my side, enforcing boundaries rather than telling me to just let things go. About a month into my new family pattern, I noticed things shifting at work. I voluntarily offered to lead a client presentation instead of passing it off. When the client questioned our timeline during the meeting, I stood my ground, explaining the negative consequences of rushing, something the old me would have just agreed to avoid conflict. Afterward, my manager spoke to me alone. She remarked that I seemed more self-assured recently. I explained I'd been focusing on advocating for myself in my personal life, and it was spilling over. She said she wanted me to take on more leadership roles. Jax noticed it too. One evening, as we cooked dinner, he commented on how I seemed lighter somehow. As I sliced vegetables, I realized he was right. Years of managing Laura's expectations had been a massive weight I hadn't fully recognized until it was gone. The sense of unease, the constant vigilance, it was all gone because I had established clear boundaries and consequences. I slept better. I no longer worriedly checked my phone at every buzz. I could make plans without agonizing over what Laura might think. 5 months passed, and life settled into a pleasant pattern. Laura and I exchanged texts about twice a month, usually neutral topics like upcoming holidays or family birthdays. We saw each other monthly at family gatherings, where she remained polite and kept her distance. My dad called me just to chat about normal things like sports or books he was reading. On Sundays, Jax and I started seriously discussing engagement and looking at bigger places. We even adopted Murphy, the tabby cat I'd wanted all those years ago. Laura didn't make a single comment. A few cousins asked if things were still weird with Laura, and I told them we'd found a solution that worked. It's not the tight relationship she probably envisioned when she married my dad, but it's a good one, full of respect, and it doesn't make me want to hurl my phone into a lake. I've come to see that it's perfectly fine for certain individuals to be in your life in a manner that is different from the way that they would like to be.